Lovely. Thank you so much for all for joining us. My name is Cassie. I'm the Marketing Communications Manager here at PETA, and I am delighted to be spending the next 45 minutes with you. I would like to acknowledge that I live and work on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to elders past and present. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And I just wanted to touch on a few housekeeping things before we get started. This webinar will be recorded and the link will be shared with all of you. So to best capture the experience, I do ask that you keep your microphones on mute and your cameras off. However, that doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you. The great thing about a live webinar is that you can ask questions directly to experts like Julie Hayes here. So please do drop your questions into the chat box and you don't have to wait until the end. If something is said that sparks a question, or if you've been reading through Julie's amazing new book and you've got a question in mind, just pop it in and we'll make sure that all your questions are answered. Now, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Julie Hayes. Julie has worked in schools as a teacher and leader, both here and in the UK, for nearly 35 years. She retired in 2019, having been principal of Callendilla Primary School in Adelaide for 16 years. Most of her career was spent in schools and preschools with high numbers of migrant and refugee children. Julie has been an active member of state and national principals associations. She won the 2018 John Lang Award for her contribution to professional learning in South Australia. And luckily for all of us, she's also a director on the PETA board, and we benefit from her expertise and insights every day. So welcome, Julie, and congratulations on your new book, Teaching the Language of Climate Change Science. What inspired you to write it?
Oh, thank you very much, and thanks to those folk who are joining us. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the land of the Kaurna people here in Adelaide. Well, look, my co-author and I have been interested in climate change for many years. I have been following the science of climate change since the late 1990s. And in 2003, I led a school as a principal that became a climate change focus school. So for me, it's been a passion for a very long time. What we found out some years ago was that actually climate change is not mentioned in the curriculum at all until for the primary years. So what are teachers supposed to do if they want to teach about climate change? It seemed to Bronwyn and I that they were left to find the curriculum area, to make the link to climate change, to make the link to sustainability, all on their own. Now, there are resources everywhere about climate change, but none that actually, until our book, have linked it to the science curriculum and taken it through to the sustainability cross-curriculum priority. So that is actually a lot of work that we felt teachers just didn't have time to do. And indeed, it's taken us 18 months to look through the science curriculum, find out the bits that have something to do with climate change, make those links, and then link it through to the sort of the so what does it mean for our environment, for our, for the environment in terms of sustainability. So, what we also wanted to do was to make sure that not only did the students that who benefit from our work learn the content of the science, but they develop the ability to speak and to write about the different aspects of climate change. We think that it's absolutely essential that children are able to explain the science behind climate change, and that they are able to write about it in ways that are cohesive and using extended text. So we don't think it's just enough to fill in cloze exercises or to label a diagram or to write one sentence answers. We think it's really important that students are able to string together in writing and orally cohesive, technically specialised text about particular subjects to do with climate change. So we wanted students to be able to explain about living things and what happens if the needs are not met through drought or through warming oceans. We wanted them to look at states of matter and work out, if water changes states of matter, what does that mean for the ice on the poles. We wanted them to be able to explain the greenhouse effect as a natural phenomenon, and to understand where the extra gas comes from that has contributed to the enhanced greenhouse effect. So those literacy aspects were absolutely forefront in our minds. So that focus on language was as strong as our wish to have children have a deep foundational understanding around the issues that underpin climate change, the understanding of climate change. We worked with science teachers and at the state and the federal level, and we also worked with academics from about 5 different universities. So this was a heck of a lot of work for us, and what we were trying to do, Cassie, was to make sure that teachers didn't have to do that work. So it's in the book, and that was our motivation, to make it much easier for teachers who wanted to do something about climate change, and for schools that wanted to have a whole school approach, to take the book and to be much more strategic around addressing climate change, which unfortunately isn't mentioned explicitly in the curriculum.
It is it's been a massive undertaking. The book is so full of information, but it's also not a book that is especially difficult to read. And I was wondering if you could talk about what's really in the book, how it's structured, and how teachers can use it.
Sure. The book is based on the climate change progression, which it's probably a good idea for the listeners to download off the PETAA website, because that has got the descriptors from the science curriculum and the summary of the science learning at different year levels, and a summary of the kind of language that you want to be developing at the different band levels. So that's a really important document in terms of planning. We've included lots of topics that appeared in the curriculum from biology and earth sciences, as you would imagine, talking about climate change, and chemical sciences, not so much from the physical sciences, again, as you would imagine, because it's very much based on the planet and the ecosystems and living systems. The book has got different chapters. The first one, the first year level we deal with is foundation. And what we hope there, and throughout other sorts of topics, is that you, as teachers, develop in students a love of the earth and all the living things in the earth, and understanding that ecosystems are precious and fragile and interdependent. And interdependent for human beings. We depend on them. So that's the essence of foundation. And the next year levels we deal with are 1 and 2, then 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and then 7 and 8. So the book deals with learning from foundation right through to year 8. Now, I guess the heart of the book is around the focus texts that we've written. And they are examples of the knowledge that we are hoping you'll develop in your students around each topic, but they are also the springboard for the activities and the investigations. Often in science, it's the other way around, that activities lead to some kind of note-taking or small written activities. But with our methodology, the focus text is both sort of the starting point and the end point, because we want students to be able to talk like the focus text and to write like the focus text. I'll say a little bit more about how to use that a little bit later on. What we've also done is saved you a heck of a lot of time by finding resources. So for the last 18 months, we've hunted through websites and books, resources, films, YouTubes, to find the best resources for you. That's another thing that teachers simply don't have time to do. So we've put that in there to save you time and to help you work through teaching your children the content of each topic. Also in the book, there's a glossary at the back which explains the terms that we've used, and Chapter 9 is devoted to actions that you can take to work with your students to mitigate climate change. Now, Chapter 2 is really important. That's where we've explained the pedagogy, now largely written by Dr. Bronwyn Parkin, who developed this pedagogy with Dr. Helen Harper and herself over a couple of years, working with marginalised students, both in a remote Aboriginal school and an urban school in Adelaide, with high numbers of non-English speaking background children. So this is a very carefully considered pedagogical approach, standing on the giant's shoulders of Vygotsky and Halliday's model of language, and that I can recommend that if you read Chapter 2 and if you read the PETAA paper where the Year 6, 7 teachers have explained the methodologies that they've used, you can find out more about that in a previous PETAA publication called Teaching with Intent 1. So that's called Scaffolding Academic Language with Marginalised Students. And that's what we were doing to develop teaching the language of climate change science. We were scaffolding students to learn the language of climate change. So as I say, Chapter 2 is essential that you read through so you understand some of the methodology. We don't leave you to work out how to do this on your own. Each chapter is carefully laid out for you to take the investigations and activities and move from learning about the topic to taking notes and writing and creating diagrams and moving to writing. So it's a very dense read, and it's highly supportive of teachers if you want to take this sort of rigorous pathway through developing literacy in science. What's next, Cassie?
That's such a beautiful way to introduce people to the topics that you spent so much time researching, and I really appreciate how clearly you explained all of that to everyone. So thank you. This is already such a valuable webinar. Thank you so much. I did want to ask you, especially at the moment, we know that reports have come out about global inaction on climate change and what that now means for our future and what it could mean if more action is not taken. So what is it that teachers can do right away to tackle climate change?
Look, Chapter 9 has lots of activities. It's divided into F to 3, Foundation to 3, 4 to 6 and 7 to 8. But my view is that there's no hierarchy for action. There's no one thing that's better to do than others. And I would advise teachers to involve students and do what you are passionate about. Take children into the wild, have them connect with the environment around your school, in parks. If you can get to the beach or if you've got some bush nearby, make sure that they connect with those areas and come to know about and care about. As teachers, I think you can start noticing things in the environment and marveling at nature. If you have got a vegetable garden, plant something. If you've got need for shade, plant shade trees. If you're going to keep animals, get a class animal and look after it. One thing that I would say that is almost at the heart of dealing with climate change is letting children know that largely the planet is warming because of the extra greenhouse gases that we're putting into the atmosphere. And we have done that for young children. It's easy to say largely through creating energy. So creating electricity is the means of putting extra greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and our use of and that has come through burning fossil fuels and also petrol and fuel for bikes and cars and trucks and public transport is again the use of fossil fuels. So if that's the one message that you get through to your children initially, that's a really important one. So cutting down on the use of electricity and reducing our dependence on fossil fuels is really at the heart of dealing with climate change. Teachers, I would ask that you keep yourself informed. That is probably the key to developing a passion and enough of an understanding so that you feel like you're on solid ground. The resources that we list in the book are really good resources, and you can rely on them to give you correct information rather than the misinformation that is around on certain media and from certain people. So that's something that I would ask that you do. Probably the best site around climate change, both for adults and students, is NASA. Our own CSIRO is great, and the Bureau of Meteorology, but NASA for Kids is just a fantastic resource. I think the real strength of taking action is what you can do at the whole school level. If you can get students involved and form some sort of group, a green team or a climate change action group, that's where the real driving passion is going to come from. My experience has been that it's really hard to stop children getting involved in this issue. Even if you haven't spent much time teaching about it in class, a number of children will know about it and care about it. And so they feel like they've got some control and some, some way of not feeling overwhelmed or discouraged by the issues around climate change if they're actually taking action. So as I say, in chapter 9, there's all sorts of suggestions. Please feel free to pick and choose from any year level. If you want to go to the year 7 outcomes and actions, go for it. And if you're a year 8 teacher and you want to pick something from year 2, 3, go for it. There is no hierarchy of action. You can, whatever you want to do that makes people feel like they've got control and they're contributing is really important. And it does depend on the kind of leadership you've got at school and your situation. Is there a garden? Is there a natural resource nearby? Are you able to keep animals? Are you able to plant things? It does depend on your school and the leadership and the connections that you have. Yeah.
We have a fantastic question, which is, of course, preceded by a thank you for your wonderful text, and it's one to be hugely proud of. So we'll make sure that gets heard. We also have a comment from Robin, who says that it is fabulous for teachers to have this list of actions starting at the preschool level up, which I think everyone would agree with. But to this question, which is actually a couple of questions, and it speaks really directly to what you were just talking about, which is for school leaders who might be joining us or watching this later, do you have advice for school leaders who want to get all of their staff on board with the ideas, actions, strategies, and resources in the book? And secondarily to that, when you were driving climate change awareness at your school, did you find all your teachers got on board immediately, or did you have to overcome pushback?
A lot of teachers were already highly committed. Quite interestingly, the kindergarten teacher was really on board. The early years framework and the early years curriculum is very much focused on connections and responsibility for our natural environment. So they are usually on board fairly quickly. You don't have to get everybody on board, but certainly work with those who are keen first. I started by showing films. Instead of a staff meeting, we went to the movies and watched An Inconvenient Truth. And then I took them again to watch 2040. So I think it's important to start with some knowledge about climate change, but also what actions people can take, again, so that they feel energized and positive towards the whole issue rather than hopeless and overwhelmed. Work with those who are keen to start off with. And really, I would challenge any of you to go and talk to your students and see who doesn't want to join a climate change action group. Michael and Louise, who wrote the PETAA paper for this book, are having to put a cap on the number of students who want to join the climate change action group. And they've done all sorts of things like working with the local council on heat mapping the school and working out where they can cool the school. They have an expert from Flinders University coming in and talking about biodiversity and what we can do on the school grounds to increase biodiversity. They are having a nighttime sleepover to go outside and monitor the bats and the animals that are nocturnal, as well as looking at excellent, David Attenborough movies around the natural world and things that we need to do to mitigate climate change.
That is such an amazing and inspiring list of ways that people can get started. So thank you so much for sharing it. For everyone who is watching along, I am going to put as many links to these things as possible that Julie has been mentioning so that you can all find it quite easily as well. I have a question here from Keith, who does thank you for this webinar and for all of your effort towards this issue. Keith is wondering if you have any recommendations for arming children with the skills they need to determine the difference between misinformation and reputable sources for this topic.
That's a really good question. That's almost the next thing that, that Bronwyn and I are going to move on to. We didn't get so much into misinformation because we were fairly busy trying to get accurate information. I suppose it would be really important for you as teachers to work out what primary sources your information comes from. You will see in the book that we've relied on things like the IPCC, the International Governmental Panel on Climate Change, the work of the chief scientist, the work of the CSIRO, the Climate Council, people like David Attenborough. So if I guess there's misinformation around, try and go back to the source of that information and work out whether that's a credible source or not. One of the things I need to say is that throughout the book, we've talked about the work of scientists because in recent years, we've seen, mainly overseas, a lack of trust in science. So we were really conscious of embedding that in each of our texts, in fact, to develop trust in science, to develop an understanding of the scientific process, to look at only reputable websites, so that students have faith in what scientists are doing and in faith in the sources that we've recommended. So yeah, going back to the original source of information and then going to the sources that we recommend here that will provide an alternative set of facts probably is all I could say at this stage.
Thank you so much for that. You've touched on this a little bit about how a positive approach sort of helps to stop teachers and students from becoming overwhelmed and feeling hopeless about the broader situation, especially when there is so much to be done and this is such ongoing work. But obviously there are going to be times when it is going to feel discouraging and difficult. How do you keep focused and motivated to work on something that sometimes feels like an incredibly big problem?
It's just too important to get discouraged and to give up. I think it's a huge issue facing humanity. And what keeps me going is the complete commitment and passion of students. As I say, if you go and ask your students what they want to do and how they want to be involved and what they want to learn about, you will be invigorated by their commitment and enthusiasm. I look at people like Greta Thunberg and the movement for climate change that you know the young people have been leading, and I can only be encouraged by that. I think it's great that that we have a new leader in the United States who's going to set a global agenda for climate change. That has given me a great deal of positivity towards keeping on dealing with it. What we have to be really careful is to not kind of lay blame on students or make them feel responsible for climate change. It's my generation that is responsible for climate change, not the current one. So that's why taking action and being positive and recognizing the work of young people and looking towards the advances that we've made in science and technology to deal with climate change, that needs to be the emphasis, as well as teaching, you know, what is happening in the atmosphere and in the oceans and to our environment around the climate change. You know, we can spend too much time focusing on the forest, on the fires, the bushfires, or droughts, or the disappearance of species through climate change. But that needs to be balanced so much by action at the local level and at the state level. And as I say, Chapter 9 is full of local activities and political actions that your students can take. So, you know, if you want to write to the Prime Minister, go right ahead. If you want to work at the local council level, who are often very active in mitigating climate change, because it's their constituents who are going to feel it firsthand. You know, if you're sitting in Canberra, maybe you don't feel the impacts of a drought or a storm or you know, threats to species. But if you're in local council areas, that's where the rubber hits the road. So they often have very good connections. And your local universities, there is always someone there who's going to be enthusiastic to work with students and give them the platform and the recognition for taking action against climate change.
Thank you. So your answers are so full of information and practical steps forward for people. And I just want to, I think a lot of us are really appreciating how much you're actually providing information that teachers can act on tomorrow if they so choose. So thank you so much for that. I also wanted to ask, because this is work that keeps happening and that we're going to keep doing in our classrooms, obviously, sometimes things that are caused by climate change, disasters, floods, fires, they're going to happen. Would you change your approach to what you've planned for teaching about this topic when it becomes something that hits quite close to home for students? Is there something that we should be keeping in mind in those moments of how we tackle this stuff?
Well, I guess if you were in the bushfires or the floods, you would be hard-pressed not to make it an immediate topic for study. And what we need to realise is that climate change didn't cause the bushfires of 2019 and 20, but they certainly exacerbated it. The climatologists tell us that the southeast of Australia and the southwest of Australia have dried significantly, and there's data about that. The summers are longer, they're drier, and so when fire hit, it had more fuel, it had stronger winds, it had drier conditions, and all those things that make the fire as intense as it was. It would be remiss of teachers not to mention the part that climate change played in making those fires the worst that we've ever seen. And in terms of floods, the north is going to get more rain because of climate change. So climate change doesn't simply mean heating the earth, because some places are actually cooler, and sometimes winter storms are going to be worse and cyclones are going to be worse. So it's really about change. That's why they've called it change. And so the north of Australia is going to get more rain, and the south and certainly the southeast and southwest are going to get less. So these intense events, it's just impossible for people who live in that area. And even if your students are very much aware of those events, It's impossible not to link the science of climate change with those events. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Would you have any particular advice for teachers who are very new to teaching and who might feel perhaps overwhelmed by the topic, by the approach, by even a little bit by being in a classroom? What would you recommend to help new teachers along on this journey?
Yeah, you know, the book we've written with Bronwyn and Helen's pedagogy is a very serious, rigorous, quite intense focus on language and climate. So perhaps you could just take one little section and give it a try. PETAA has lots of great professional learning online that will support you in terms of learning about language, and Bronwyn and Helen's book, Teaching with Intent, will help you again with pedagogy. For a new teacher, I would be suggesting that you just quietly take note of things that come up to do with climate change. There's lots of really engaging things on TV, on YouTube. Again, NASA can't be beat. Just quietly and slowly build your understanding about how it's happening, why it's happening, what the threats are, and what we can do about it. But ask your students what they want to do. Caring for an animal is a really great way to start, because without knowledge of meeting the needs of the natural environment, students aren't going to care whether those needs are not met. So something very simple like caring for an animal, or planting a vegetable garden and including some plants that will attract bees, because bees are pollinators. So just start small, just start doing something and start taking note of what's on the news, what the documentaries say. And there's, as I say, there's some very engaging films that you can learn through. And suggest to your principal that you actually watch these films as staff meeting. That went down really well with my staff, who really enjoyed learning about it and discussing it and then bringing it to the classroom. And go easy on yourself. You're not expected, you know, it's taken Bronwyn and I 18 months to write this book and make the links between the science curriculum, climate change and sustainability. So it's not easy, it's rocket science. So go easy on yourself and don't be too hard on yourself, just make a start.
Thank you so much. I was wondering if you could share with us an experience that you had out of school in a classroom that everyone came on board to work on a project that makes steps towards caring for the planet. The memories that you hold close to your heart. Can you share one of them with us to inspire us?
Yeah, sure. Back when I was showing the staff An Inconvenient Truth, now that's a long time ago, that's Al Gore's original film. We started talking to the students about climate change and sharing some of that film with them. And they said, look, that's fine, but how can you possibly not start a student action group? So they forced me to create the Climate Change Action Group, and they took control and leadership. Before you knew it, they were writing articles, they were touring the Minister for Environment, we had the Premier at our school, we dug up the lawn that children weren't playing on, it was just there for looks, and we planted native vegetation. We changed lights, we put in tanks across the school to catch about 1 million litres of water. We put subsoil irrigation onto the oval. We put in solar panels. We changed light globes to low energy use light globes. We changed the low flow to low flow taps. We plumbed the tanks to the toilets so that the toilets were running on rainwater. We created a frog pond to attract insects. We found a remnant vegetation on the boundary and we propagated that around the school and with the local council down at the, it's called Breakout Creek, a local creek. And we made films about our work and won a film competition. So really just make a start and see where it takes you. There's no pathway, there's no rules, but I would suggest that you have a look at chapter 2 around the focus on language, because without students being able to talk articulately and in cohesive long texts and write and being able to write like that using scientific specialized language and making sense of a long piece of writing, then you probably haven't got the learning outcomes that you want. So take action, but also pay particular focus to the language and the development of the language. And again, chapter 2 will help you to develop that pedagogy to bring the language along with the scientific knowledge.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I just want to read out this comment, which is thanking you and your co-author, Bronwyn Parkin, for creating such a valuable and quality resource. We owe it to our students to be knowledgeable and passionate about this issue so our children are informed, empowered, and inspired to create change, which I think is something that we all think. And we actually have a comment here from Anne as well, who says, thank you so much for this important resource and for your presentation. It's a very, very important aspect of everyone's teaching and learning programs. So I hope that you know how much we appreciate all the incredibly hard work that you have done to make it easier for teachers to go forth and do the work. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. That was our aim, to just put it all in one package for teachers, just so that they could get hold of it and start working on climate change without having to do all that research and connecting for themselves.
It's amazing. Thank you so much. You give so much to the profession and we're all very, very grateful for it. The book is called Teaching the Language of Climate Change Science. It is available on the PETAA website. This week, we are offering a free copy of the paper that Julie mentioned before with the teachers who have set up a climate action group and who are modeling the lessons of the book in a Year 6-7 class focusing on greenhouse gases. So we're popping a free copy of that in with every copy of the book if you do decide to buy it. So I'll include a little link to that in my email to you with the recording. We'll also include a discount code on the book for this week too.
Cassie, can I mention a couple of things?
Of course you can.
There on the website very soon, if it's not there now, will be a grammatical analysis of the focus texts that we wrote that are going to help you guide the learning, both of the science and the language, so that there's some grammar lessons there for you and some support to teach the grammar at different year levels. And also Bronwyn is developing a professional learning course that will come out later this year with some footage from classroom teachers who were trialling this for us at Carindilla Primary School.
Yes, thank you so much for mentioning that. I absolutely recommend, whether you do purchase the book or not, to have a look at the book extras on our website. It includes a lot of links to resources and additional materials, even beyond what Julie has mentioned here. They are just a fantastic source of information. So we'll pop those in for you as well, along with the progressions from preschool to year 8 that Julie mentioned, the movies that you mentioned, and a whole bunch of other lucky stuff. You'll also obviously get the recording of this webinar, so you can share that with your staff members, with your colleagues, with your peers, and we can make sure that we are all creating movement toward change together. Thank you so much for your time, Julie. I really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for your really thoughtful questions and for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate it. If you would like to approach this issue from a more literature-based angle, we are going to be doing a webinar next week with the author and illustrator of Iceberg. That's Claire Saxby and Jess Raclieft. Jess actually illustrated the book cover of Teaching the Language of Climate Change Science, and it is beautiful. Their book is about the life cycle of an iceberg, which touches gently and age appropriately on how the life cycle of an iceberg is impacted by climate change. So we'll be talking to them about the experience of creating the book, the creative process that goes into writing, and also what it means to include those messages in literature and how we can open up the world to students through books as well as through really important pedagogy. So please do join us for that if you can. That is for our PETA members only. So we would love to have you on board so that you can come along. Thank you again, everyone, for your time. I hope that you have a lovely evening, and I will send this email out to you, all of you, within the next hour or two. Thank you so much. And thank you again to Julie.
Bye.